What up, YouTube? What up, YouTube? It's your boy, the author. Right back at that ass again. Here's another one. Had to high pitch that at the end right there. Yeah, shout out to everyone who's been making comments on the page, man, subscribing, supporting. I appreciate you. I also appreciate this open dialogue that we're having, man, because without you, there is no reason for me to do what I do, as far as making comments and stuff like that. So appreciate that. Plus, I learn from you as well. So just let me know how you feel. This video, man, I'm going to make, it's kind of like a spinoff of some of my other videos, man. But this is, I think I mentioned this before, too, about how the black community wastes money on things that are not important, and they don't have money for things that are. I was watching this documentary on Netflix, man. You guys should still check it out too, unless you've already, watched the documentary. Even if you've heard of the story, you probably still would want to see the documentary if you ever had time to watch it. But it's called the Kalief Browder story. I think the name is spelled like Kalief Browder, something along those lines. But Kalief Browder, this young black boy from the Bronx, and I made a video too about who cries for the young black boys. Video that you probably could check out. I've been getting some positive responses on that video, but not to cut myself off, man, but Kalief Browder was a kid from the Bronx, man, who came from, he was raised with foster parents. His mother was a heroin addict. He was raised with foster parents. He was raised in the Bronx, New York. And in addition to that, man, he was like a typical young black kid, young black boy, trying to find his way in the street, whatnot. And in addition to that, man, he got into the situation. Now, before he had like minor run-ins with the law, but nothing major. But these Mexicans, which I can make another video on, but this is a Mexican guy, said that someone stole his brother's backpack. And the police went on patrol to look for the guy. So they came across Kalief and his friend. And then pretty much the officers just told police that he fit the description, because New York at that time, and I think they still do have that stop and frisk policy, where pretty much, man, that means that they can stop pretty much anyone and frisk them without having probable cause, which is I thought, that's a violation of one of our amendment rights, or of our constitutional rights, but whatever, right? But they have this stop or frisk, and they said that in terms of stop and frisk, a vast majority of those who are violated by this rule, that Giuliani and those other politicians in New York and Trump, they support this rule. About 53 or 63% of the people who have to adhere to this violation are young black males. I think 35% are Spanish, and only 9% are white. So the vast majority of those who are, who have to be subjected to the stop and frisk law are majority. It affects the majority of the people affected by this law are blacks and Hispanics, particular blacks and Hispanic young males. But anyway, so he was subjected to stop and frisk. The cops told him that he was a suspect. So, they arrested him, took him down to the precinct. And I think he ended up going to Rikers Island. And he was awaiting trial. And while he was awaiting trial, man, to make a long story short, he ended up staying at Rikers Island for about 3 years. And every time he went to court, man, they pretty much told this kid they weren't ready for trial. They weren't ready for trial. They weren't ready for trial. And then throughout this ordeal, 'cause I didn't even know that they can hold you that long without you seeing the judge, because he wasn't convicted, but he still ended up doing 3 years in jail without being convicted. I repeat, he ended up doing 3 years in jail without being convicted. He was 16 years old at the time, when they placed him in Rikers Island, and they pretty much had placed him in the holding unit, or the juvenile unit. And he, during his experience at Rikers Island, he was subjected to beatings, because he didn't want to join the gang, so inmates jumped him and beat on him, and they fought him, and he ended up fighting them back. He ended up spending about almost over 300 days in solitary confinement, which other I believe they say internationally, the NATO looks at more than 15. If you spend more than 15 days in solitary confinement, they consider that torture. A lot of countries around the world consider that torture. If you keep someone in solitary confinement for more than a certain amount of time. But here in the U.S., they can keep you in there. They keep people in solitary confinement for years, man. You can do sentences in solitary confinement. They have guys been in solitary confinement for 30 plus years, man. But they had this kid in there, and he spent like 300 days in solitary confinement. And after numerous fights, and they finally let him go. They couldn't find the witness, and they knew they couldn't find a witness to the supposed backpack that was stolen. They knew they couldn't find a witness, but they didn't tell the family. So they tried to get him to plea. So a lot of guys who are pretty much saying they did these crimes, they get these guys to plea out, because they're holding these guys prisoner, and they tell you, well, in order for you to be released, a lot of times the cops don't always have the right people. They can't find who actually did the crime. So they pick up a guy on the street. He'll say he didn't do it. They may not have the evidence, so they'll hold him. And then they just keep holding the guy. And they say, well, hey, look, man, if you plea out to this or that, we'll just give you, time served. We'll give you probation plus 2 years. If we take you to trial and you get convicted, you can do about 10 years. So guys just plea out to get the shorter amount of time so they can go home. So a lot of guys that are getting convicted of these crimes, which I didn't know, I'm not one of those guys that's been in and out of jail. So I didn't know about this. So the documentary was very educational to me. But they got guys playing out, man, who didn't even do the crime. And so for him, but Kalief, this guy, he said that he wasn't going to plea out. So he stuck to his guns, and they ended up having to let him go anyway because they didn't have the witness. And so his story became a national phenomenon, man. I mean, it was a very popular story. He met with celebrities like Jay-Z, Rosie O'Donnell. I think he was a guest on Rosie O'Donnell's show. They made a documentary about the kid, and his story became very famous. Now, he, in some of his pictures, he had certain numbers on his shirt, which kind of led me to believe, I didn't know if this story was totally true or not, because he had those numbers. And anytime you get celebrities involved, my conspiracy mind kicks in. So I'm like, okay, is this correct or is this not correct? Or, are they just making something up? But to make a long story short, man, the kid eventually, he was dealing for what they call PTSD, and that's usually what soldiers come back as. But I think there was damage to his mind while he was in solitary confinement, and they say he became extremely paranoid, and eventually, I believe, in sometime in I think June 16th of 2015, he hung himself outside of his bedroom window. He was found by his mother. And here's the thing, man. I mean, this is a very tragic story. But here's the thing. I mean, now the justice system in America as a whole, I believe, hates young black boys. They hate the majority of young black men, or men in general, black men in general. They don't have a lot of love for Hispanic men. You know, the only ones they really kind of look out for halfway is white males. You know, but for the most part, as far as their do not like list, I believe that, i.e., copper colored people, uh, so called African Americans, Hebrew Israelites, American Indians, Egyptologists, whatever you want to call yourself, these, we're the most hated, us and Hispanics, typically. But even Hispanics are rung above us on the Darwin chart. If you look at the color scheme, black is on the bottom, white is on the top, so on and so forth. And in the military justice system, the military and the justice system kind of works in a similar fashion. So I'm not surprised by how this kid was treated. And we shouldn't always act surprised when something like this happens, because we all know that there is injustice in this country, in this world. We all know who's on the bottom, and regardless, even if you're not liked as a person, if you don't have economic power to support you, then that makes a bad situation even worse. So one is race, two is, class and things, not having money and a strong support system. But, everything was bad, though, in terms of him being picked up, the stop and frisk. I found that terrible. Him having to wait. He wasn't served properly. The judges ignored what they're supposed to do. And the DA was terrible, and of course the DA, the DA and the black judge is the ones that they're pinning all of this on. See, that's a bigger point that I'm gonna make in a minute. But the whole justice system failed this kid, Kalief Browder. But what was worse, him spending 300 days in solitary confinement, horrendous. Him getting repeatedly jumped by attacked by kids is bad, and even worse, him turning into him having to turn into a predator himself just to survive was bad as well. And this story again, the Kalief Browder story, is on Netflix. And not trying to, I don't work for Netflix, but I just thought you guys might want to be interested in watching it. But here's the thing, man. What was worse than all of that to me was the fact that this kid, man, had a $1,500 bond, and it cost $900 to get him out. And his mother, his family, the community could not raise the money to get him out. Come to find out, a lot of the blacks and Hispanics who are stuck on Rikers Island, they're stuck on Rikers Island because they can't pay a bond between $500 to $1,500. Like no one will bond them out. Those kids who are going through all that with the being jumped and being slammed up against the wall by the COs, and they also showed how the guards, how brutal they are, even black guards, how brutal they are to other black offenders. But yeah, they was talking about a lot of the kids there, man. It's not like they have $100,000 bond. Their bonds are between $1,500 to $500. And to me, that was the worst part, bro. Because here's the thing, especially in the black community. Now, and they blame this on his father because Kalief was a part of an adopted family. The father left the family. They said he worked for the bus services. He had the money, but he didn't pay the money to bail a kid out. And you know what I'm saying? I understand that. And they, in all these stories, they try to demonize the father to make him look bad. And maybe there's some truth into that. Maybe the father is a piece of shit, My father wasn't in my life, and plenty of people, but I think I became all the better for it. But I did have a grandfather who was you know who was focused and who was a positive influence in my life. So I didn't lose out. But here's the thing, man. Not being able to get this kid to pay a $900 bond to get him out. Because what happened was it took 2 weeks for the family to actually raise the money. And by that time, when they actually had the money, the court said, well, we can't allow you to let him out because he's on a violation because he's previously on parole for stealing that bread truck that he stole before this incident happened. Okay, I understand that. But before that happened, he did have a bond. Because the lawyer thought he was bonded out. He was sending all of Kalief's mail to his mother's address. So, but I mean, this story is bigger than this kid. So here's the thing, man. And this was what bothers me about the black community. You'll have these kids make fun of other kids for not having Jordans, which are like $200 or $300 a pair. You go on the average project where you're going to the average black home, you got a TV, they got brand new TV. If you rob the average project, you will get some money. You may or may not get physical money, but if you don't, you can easily get yourself a 60 or 65-inch TV, Samsung, nice TV. You might get a 2 or 3 or 4 PlayStations. Here's what's in the average black project or household. Now and this little small box that might be an apartment. Now I'm not saying my place is huge, but I mean some of these projects have places that are smaller than what I have now, and there's about 5 or 6 kids as well as 4 or 5 adults in the average black household. I repeat, these households are packed, almost like we're close to like how Mexicans live. So here's the thing. Now if you rob the average project, you'll find a 60-inch TV, maybe even Samsung TV worth a few $1,000s. You might find 2 or 3 PlayStations. You might find about 8 or 9 pairs of Jordans worth $200 a piece. You know what I'm saying? You might find jewelry. You may even find some cash. You know what I'm saying? Plenty of clothes. So why, when now I understand that the mother may be short on money. She had a heart attack, things of that nature. She was on a fixed income. But the brother, none of his brothers had any money. The sister, he had plenty of brothers and sisters. He had about 4 or 5 brothers, 3 or 4 sisters. Well, at least one sister, I'm sorry. None of them, nobody had anything. And then in the community, she went to the next door neighbor. I think it took them 2 weeks to finally get it. And that's good because for a lot of these communities, they wouldn't have it at all. But this is what makes the black community so weak, man. His crew, the guys he was running with, he was with a neighborhood crew. They were the Bloods. Now I'm assuming they may or may not have been, in those streets hustling. But I'm from the inner city. I've talked with, I've been friends with Bloods, Crips. Their main source of income is, drug distribution. So you can't go to any of his friends. They out there, quote unquote hustling. And now outside of the average small black household or small black apartment, there's usually a big truck. So it's like, man, how do you have all these devices, these shoes, clothes, X, Y, Z, but when it comes to something important, when it comes to bailing out a brother from the community that we all know, a lot of people knew him in the community, we can't even get up $500 to bail somebody out. Like we can't even take care of our, is it a thing where we can't take care of ourselves or we won't? Because it's the same thing with one of my boys, man. He made a mistake. He was going to UNCC, Charlotte, and had his car. His car got a boot on it because he shouldn't have parked. He knew he shouldn't have parked there. They put a boot on his car. But most importantly, I haven't even talked to bruh in months, man. but he had no one else to turn to. So they put the boot on his car. He needed $75, to get the boot off of this car, because if they had booted it, they'd have took it down and towed it. It would have cost him about probably $150 to $200 to get it released, and it wasn't his car. So he called his mother. She didn't have it. His sister didn't have it. She only had 20. His father didn't have anything, and then he called me. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, he took me over his cousin's house before. And all these people, he knew people, but when it came to a jam, nobody could help him out. And here's the thing, and I came down there and did what I had to do, and not to brag or anything like that. It's far from that. I just think that his story, in terms of the financial aspect, the part of Kalief's story, which is the saddest to me, is most prevalent with most blacks, especially in the inner city. The part that very much bothered me was the part where they couldn't raise the money to get him out. Because once they couldn't raise the $900, the system probably said, "Oh, don't nobody give a fuck about this kid. So let's start playing games." For the average white community, and I'm not saying, even if you go to the average trailer park, what I'm saying, you can scrounge up money like that, man. I'm not saying that there aren't poor whites. Yes, there are poor whites. I've had poor whites call in for the job and try to get accounts set up, and they don't even have $1 on their card. But, in terms of raising money, they are better at raising money than us, man. We suck at raising money. And we have more, in terms of more fancy clothes and jewelry and Xboxes than a lot of the people in the poor white trash community. I.e. the trailer park community, not to be racial with it, but a lot of your average blacks, if you stand them next to a trailer park person, they'll be dressed to kill. They'll blow them out the water in terms of dress. First of all, my brother's gonna have on some Jordans, or the sister's gonna have on some Jordans that cost $200, which probably cost half as much as the trailer park. They're gonna have jewelry, name brand socks, name brand shirts, and jeans and all this shit. But I bet you the trailer park, if you stand a black next to a trailer park person, and if that trailer park person needed money for bail, and the black person needed money for bail, who do you think will get bailed out first if it was in terms of raising money? You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing I was saying too. Just because you can buy it, man, doesn't mean you can afford it. You can buy it, but if you don't have money left for anything else, then you can't afford that shit. Like I said, this one dude, the father of this basketball star, said he coming out with some shoes. It's gonna be $400. Guess who buy that shit? Blacks, copper colored people, i.e. African Americans, i.e. Hebrew Israelites, i.e. Moors. Yep. You know what I'm saying? That was the most tragic, because him getting trashed by the justice system, I expect that, because that's been happening since the execution of the first black boy in Texas. I forget my man's name, but Steinier, I forget the brother's name. It was a 14-year-old kid, and he was sent to the electric chair in Texas in the 1940s. The hate for young black boys in America has been it goes all the way back to slavery. And then I expect that, but we can't ask them to stop that. That's generational. Only way we can safeguard ourselves from something like that is to pull together, man. And you can't even raise five, and some of them guys in Rikers is stuck on Rikers Island because they don't have nobody will bail them out. $500. And the bail's bondsman people will take merchandise. You can pawn stuff. You can bring your TV, you can bring your Xbox. They will pawn stuff for you, man, and then give you the money of however the amount that's worth. A lot of the bail bonds people will allow you to pawn. So it's like we don't really give a fuck about our own people, man, and that's even more sad. That's what's going to make this wrath even worse. Because you got a system that hates you, and then you're not going to pull together with your own people. You have no umbrella for that rain that's going to come down, man. We're going to keep that foot up our ass. Because his situation, like I said, I compare his situation to my boy's situation, and it's not the same thing. I mean, my boy is not in and out of prison. He goes like he's a college student. But my point is, whether you're a college student or you're a guy who's in and out of prison, or you're like this Kalief brother. In terms of us raising money, even on a middle class standpoint, we suck at that, man. We're horrible at that. And I can't see how it's so hard for people to raise money if you're going to go to school and talk about another kid because they don't have Jordans, or you're going to pull up to your man because you driving this fancy car. You're going to pull up beside his car, or you're going to treat him less than because he doesn't have a Mercedes like you do, which, that Mercedes is, you're barely paying for it. You're barely making the payments. And all the payments that you're making is going to the Germans or someone else. It's not going back to your community. But at the same point, if our mentalities is kind of fucked up because, it's a situation where we're concerned about things that aren't important, material objects that, we want to buy. Even when we spend the money on those Jordans and those fancy cars, that money is not going to matriculate in our community. So that leaves us without money we could use when something important comes up, where somebody that we love is being mistreated in terms of being incarcerated. If we had that extra money where we weren't spending money on those objects, we'd have the money to bail these guys out and get these guys a suitable lawyer. Because of course, with Kalief, not only did it take them 2 weeks to get the bail money, and by the time they got it, it was too late. He had a public defender for a lot of his hearings, man. So the kid didn't have a decent lawyer either. And regardless of what socioeconomic class you're in, I mean, now some rich blacks may have decent lawyers, but some of your middle class who are barely paying the bills, and a lot of your inner city, we don't have a lawyer. So I mean, you're stuck between 2 points, man. I mean, it's a terrible thing, But I mean, to me, that was the most sad part of the story, where we didn't have his community. His community couldn't even raise $900 to get him out, and in addition to that, they didn't really have enough money to get him a decent enough lawyer to where he could fight that early, because that's the criminal justice system are a bunch of sharks. I mean, as soon as they know that they have somebody that no one gives a fuck about, now they can start going crazy because, jails make money. Jails and prisons are big business, obviously, that most of us know this. So they rather keep you than not. And you can say, okay, well, in his case, it wasn't a fact of being black. He was poor. Well, both black and poor is synonymous usually in this country. And second of all, I mean, poor was part of it. But at the same time, man, I can't see how the black community, you'll say we're so poor that to where we now if his bail was $200,000, $300,000, even after getting a bond. It was so high that even after getting the bond, I mean, mom would have had to put her house up. I can halfway understand that. But a lot of these kids on Rikers, man, they bail is between $1,500 to as low as $500. And they stuck there for years because can't nobody get them $500. I mean, you can pawn a PlayStation. Some of these you can pawn 2 PlayStations and get that. You can pawn 1 PlayStation and 2 games and get that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a lack of what is it? What do they say? What they say, empathy or apathy? I mean, it's like, if you don't give a fuck about your own people, this storm is going to be strong and long, my friend. I just want to touch base with y'all, man. I mean, y'all can check that story out, that Kalief Browder story out, man, if y'all like. And Just let me know what you think, man. In your neck of the woods, is this a problem with you know, black community wasting money on things that don't matter, but don't have money for things that do? Let me know how you feel about this, and hit me up. And if you're offended, I'm glad. You know what I'm saying? And y'all be safe out there, all right? It's your boy.